Well, I liked your summary of the theme, Wesley. God flips things around. That's what he does. Right, Caleb?
Yes, sir.
He flips things around.
Yep.
We got a verse for us?
Yep. Should be. Is this on? Sweet. All right. Yeah, it's Esther 8, 3 through 8. Perfect. All right. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter to Esther. Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who were in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked."
Good work. Thank you. Appreciate you reading for us today. That's awesome. So, we had a big week here last week. I just want to pause and give a big shout out to all the volunteers that helped with VBS. It's just great. So even if you weren't here, thank you for that. That was good. They had lots of kids, lots of activity, singing songs, doing crafts, all kinds of stuff. It takes, as you know, a lot of adults to make that many kids do good things. And so, anyway, a lot of neat stuff, neat stories, and a lot of seeds planted, you know, and sometimes in little kids' minds, you wonder, don't you? Like, well, what's going on? But anyway, this is great to get God's word in there, solid teaching, games, all kinds of stories, a lot of fun stuff. And so thank you. We wanted to thank you for everybody who volunteered. One thing I love about this church is the massive volunteer culture we have. And I love the staff, and I love the elders. I love you, the people here. I guess that's more than one thing. But anyway, I'm very grateful here. And so that's awesome. Thank you for that. We're grateful. And so today is Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to those that are fathers. And I was thinking about Mordecai on Father's Day, because Mordecai's father is like, you know, he names his kid worshiper of Marduk. It's like, thanks, Dad. So maybe you had a father like Mordecai's father that was sort of spiritually adrift, and he just wasn't there for you spiritually growing up. It's not too late. God found Mordecai, and he's a man of courage and faith, and you can find God, and God can find you, no matter who your father was. Maybe you're a son, and you had a father like that, and again, it's never too late to become the man that God wants us to be, but God's goodness is going to be at the center of whatever kind of men and women we are in terms of his goodness. So that's a reminder for Father's Day. All right, so this is Grace Life Bible Church. We find grace and life, and a lot of stuff up here. Sometimes I go through it too fast, so let's just slow down. Our core values, we have 4 core values: knowing God and his word, experiencing his grace, and then logically extending his grace to others, which can contribute to growing in healthy relationships and impacting those near and far. So it's kind of how we work. Everything's connected, right? And so really these rhythms of grace at some churches and some people, you get this heavy-duty, legalistic, you better, you have to, you ought to, you failed to, you have to just, you pick up the slack and get going as a Christian. Like, what's wrong with you, right? That's not helpful. And so as I read the New Testament, it seems that we are invited, that's our theme for 2025, we're invited to respond to what God has already done. The gospel it's behind us. It's happened. It's good news. We need to hear that, and then we have a choice to make. Will I believe in the old covenant of death, or will I believe in the new covenant of life? That's the choice before us while we're alive, walking on the planet, because eventually the clock shuts down and you can't make that choice. And so that's important. And so anyway, we're making disciples, becoming and making disciples. So today, We are resilient disciples who are invited to identify God's fingerprints on our story yesterday, whatever happened in our past, so we can have faith and hope in Him as we face today's broken dreams and disappointments. So there's a connection between, so far in Esther, I've framed it like this. God's fingerprints are in our past, and then that gives us hope like in the future. But the challenge is to, in the middle of today's disappointment, have faith that it will make sense in the future. And it always doesn't in our lifetime. It just doesn't. But yet that doesn't change the fact that God is doing something on His kingdom level that we can trust Him for. That make sense? So, having said that, let's review. This is part of the Old Testament right here. We start off with Genesis. And almost right away in chapter 3, the wheels fall off and there's sin, and the story plunges down into darkness and death and sin. And immediately, God issues a promise of a coming Messiah. And then we have Exodus and Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, and the story seems to be going towards this promise, like they're going to intersect. And then it just, again, the wheels fall off. Because of massive disobedience over hundreds of years, God is patient, Assyria is sent as God's servant to discipline Israel. Well, they're annihilated. It's pretty severe discipline. That's 722. And then Judah, you have Assyria messing with Judah and Israel, and then you have Babylon, and then you have Persia, and down at the bottom there, Esther, the last book chronologically, as the story is laid out chronologically. Esther is the last one before you get to the New Testament. Anyway, so that's kind of where we are in terms of what's been going on. And the overall picture, the overall question is, where is God? God can be found where you least expect to find Him, and God can find you in places you least expect to be found. So in the middle of our addiction, sin, and rebellion, you can be found by God, all right? And so that's something we want to remember. Okay, quick review. Chapter 1, am I alone? Nope, you're not alone. God is everywhere in the story behind the scenes. Remember, in this book, the name of God never appears. There's prayer. It is never formally mentioned. I think it's there with fasting. The Torah is not there, so God is purposefully cloaked behind the scenes. And as I like to phrase it, in Persia, this story happens in Persia. In a land that does not name God, the story does not name God, but yet God is very much present and involved. So that's the encouraging thing. Chapter 2, Esther wins a beauty contest, but we saw that beauty is internal, and I'm not beautiful because I perform for the king, but because the ultimate king has performed for me. He has valued us, no matter who we are. Men were adequate, women beautiful in His eyes, and He has sacrificed for us. Am I safe? Yeah, we're safe because we see His fingerprints on our story long before we face a crisis. We're not the hero of our story. It's His fingerprints, not ours. And are we trusting God's plan and trusting His timing? And that's kind of where we've been. And so today we are doing Can I Hope? That's today's thing. Can I hope? Okay? And so we have tried to talk about the idea of just tracking in your life, your day-to-day life, where do you see God's fingerprints? It's been fun. I've talked to some of you, and just the idea of looking for that has helped. Just to think, where is God's fingerprints? What's He doing? And then we can usually see some things that maybe we would let slide. A while ago, this is kind of a silly illustration, but I was buying a tripod on Marketplace, paid through PayPal, a guy in Oklahoma named Dakota, in case he's out there, ripped me off. But anyway, so he shows a picture of this certain tripod, carbon fiber, nice and small, traveling kind of thing, and that's exactly the one I want. So I'm texting him, and I'm like, okay, I'll pay you at the post office. When you're out there, he takes a picture of it. He ships it. It's great. I get the box, except it's huge. And I'm like, what? So I open it up. It's the wrong tripod. It's just this huge gargantuan thing that it's nice. It's also carbon fiber, but it's not the one I wanted. And I try to message him. Ghost. He's just gone. He's just gone. He's got my money. He sent me some other tripod. And so then starts the forever long battle with PayPal, right? What a hassle. You know what I mean? So I had screenshots like, here's what he said, here's what I did, and here, and finally, they refund my money. And I don't know, if you work for PayPal, let me know. Who lost money? Was it Dakota or PayPal? I don't know. But anyway, they give me my money back, and then I'm stuck with this tripod, and Dakota's long gone, so I just got a tripod. A nice big carbon, and anyway. So now I look back on that, and I'm like, oh, maybe God's fingerprints was like, John, you need this big one. You don't know it yet, but here, I'll arrange it so you can have a free tripod. But in the moment, we're not like, oh, this is great, because God's fingerprints are on this. I'm getting ripped off, and somehow, right? I mean, it's just a hassle. So anyway, like I said, there are other more significant things going on in our lives that I just can't tell you about, but we see God's thumbprints in pretty significant ways. That was just a silly but true story. Okay, so the book of Esther. The book of Esther doesn't happen in Jerusalem. It doesn't happen in Israel. It happens in Persia. And this is a land where nobody knows Yahweh. They worship a god called Ahura Mazda. It's a whole other thing. But the story is not even about getting them out of Persia back to Israel. The story is about getting God back into them. Because you have this, if you read it carefully, there's evidence that the people still in Persia, they didn't want to go back. When Zerubbabel took 50,000 people back, they stayed there. And it seems like their spiritual condition is slipping a little bit. In fact, Esther takes place about 480 BC. 30 years later, the book of Nehemiah happens. Listen to this condition, the spiritual condition of the Jews, only 30 years after the book of Esther. Nehemiah says, "In those days I saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab." Well, that's a big deal. "And half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but only the language of the other people." They're losing their culture. They don't even speak their language. So they're walking away from their God. They're walking away from their language. And so you have this theme, I think, that, again, it's not getting the Jews out of Persia. That's not the solution. The solution is to get God into them. And if I can make an application only 7 minutes into my sermon, it might be like maybe you have a big problem and you think, hey, my solution is to get out. I've got to get out of this, to change my zip code, to get out, whatever. Maybe it is. Sometimes that is. But maybe it's our heart. Maybe we just need God to get into our heart, and maybe that's what we need most. But anyway, all right. So that's kind of where we are. And so, all right, chapter 8. The goal here is to view God's fingerprints in our past so we have hope in today's crisis. All right? So here's our title. Can I hope? How am I supposed to have hope when I'm in the middle of broken dreams, overwhelming scenarios, and crushing setbacks, when nothing's working out, everything is broken? You're like Alexander, who has a terrible, horrible, very bad, no good day. And you're like, and the preacher's saying I'm supposed to have hope. Yeah, I am. And I'll get there. Okay. Anyway, so this is the setup question. Can I have hope? Because Esther and Mordecai run into a brick wall where all hope is gone. It is a dead end, and I'll explain that. Okay, chapter 8, verse 1. Now, in chapter 7, Haman has just been killed, hung on the gallows, and so that's kind of what's going on. Chapter 8, verse 1. On that day, the very day Haman was killed, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house or the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai, this is Esther's cousin, came before the king, for Esther had told the king what Mordecai was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken off from Haman, yanked it off Haman's dead body, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house or the estate of Haman. So now look at this reversal. Yeah, reversal is a main theme of the book of Esther. Haman wanted to kill all the Jews, and now who's wearing the ring? Mordecai. And Haman's dead. It's just this flip-flop, okay? But remember what Mordecai's name means? Worshipper of Marduk. Now, Cyrus, the first king when Persia took over, after Babylon, Cyrus, he was very tolerant, religiously tolerant. He said, Jews, go back, build your temple. He gave them money, go back. And so Cyrus and Persia in general was known for being much more tolerant than, like, certainly Assyria. But Xerxes, Ahasuerus, he reversed that policy of toleration. He tore down temples to Marduk. He forbid worshiping Marduk. And he was very committed to Zoroastrianism, again, which is just a really bizarre religion. They worship fire and all kinds of weird stuff. And if you Google where the most people are in America that worship Zoroastrianism today, it's in California. Just saying, it's true. No slam. It's just a fact. But anyway, there are still people. Anyway, so the point is, Mordecai's name represents everything the king does not like about religion. So Mordecai is not really on like a super chum relationship with the king. All right. Okay, so here's one reversal right off the bat. The king gives Haman his ring. The king gives Mordecai the same ring. So you see this reversal. There's lots of reversals, as you can anticipate. We have a lot of blanks to fill in. So that's a reversal. Okay, now, verse 3. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, there's that important title, and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. Now remember, in the culture, you don't just go into the king's presence uninvited. So she barges in again, risking her life again for the third time, I think. And the king's probably like, this woman, what is her deal? Like, what? Here's the staff. What do you want now? You know what I mean? And so it's interesting she's doing that. But she falls at his feet, which is closer in proximity. Last time she stood there and talked at a distance. I think that's interesting. But this chapter, she's weeping. This is the only time in the whole book she weeps. And it's after the threat of Haman is already dead. Isn't the story done? Shouldn't the credits roll? I mean, what's the deal? I mean, if she's going to be weeping, I would think it would be earlier at the second banquet when she's like, hey, this guy's trying to kill us all. That's the time to weep. But no, it comes here. Wow. Why is she weeping? Because she's failed. Haman is dead, sure. Mordecai's been rewarded, and Queen Esther has been rescued from the threat of Haman. Okay, that's great, but his edict is still out there. And in 8 months from that point, all the Jews are going to be annihilated, and she still feels that burden appropriately, and she is trying to get the king to change that. But the king, Esther has framed the dilemma. Remember, she didn't come out and say, hey, I'm a Jew, and this guy's trying to kill us all. She's like, someone at the banquets, someone's trying to take me from you. And I can't tell you who it is because we're having dinner and Haman's here. Okay, so she's pretty, but she framed it as the threat was someone's trying to take her from the king. Well, now the guy, Haman, who did that is dead, so in the king's mind, we're done. Whatever, 8 months, people dead, whatever, it happens all the time. But, you're safe now, so close that box, put it back in the shelf, we're done. And Esther's like, yeah, no, that's not all. She was like, I wanted to expose Haman's evil and to have you, king, identify me with my Jewish people and save them, not just save me. And so that's kind of where she's at. What is she supposed to do? All right? How can she hope that she and her people have a future? Wow. Does she have any reason to look in her past and see God's fingerprints that could give her hope in that moment? And we've looked at this, a lot, all right? God's fingerprints. He's involved in a marital squabble that results in Vashti getting fired and Esther getting promoted to king. He's involved at the beauty contest when Esther wins that. He's involved at the job site where Mordecai overhears, hey, we're going to go kill the king tomorrow night, and then Esther tells the king. God's fingerprints are in the roll of the dice or the casting of lots because Haman wanted to determine through his magicians and astrologers what's the best time to kill all these Jews. And the date they land on is like 11 months in the future, which gives the Jews tons of time to figure stuff out, okay? In the word of concerned cousin, Mordecai is advising Esther. And the king, this is really a central, I'll bring this up next week. The sleepless night of the king, divine insomnia, right? The king can't sleep. Hey, read something to me. And, well, here's a story about these guys that tried to kill you, and and everything just unpacks from there. When a wife changes her mind. Haman goes home. What's her name? Zeresh. I don't know any women named Zeresh. Anyway, she's like, well, you're a dead man. He's like, okay. And he was. And then anyway, at the gallows, the reversal, he was hung, not Mordecai, so that's all the stuff going on there. All right. So that's kind of fun to see that. But Esther's choices, she is in between a rock and a hard place. She either has to retreat into the palace in the comfort of the palace and watch her kindred die, be annihilated, or she has to advance into the king's presence and boldly confront him and say, hey, I'm not done, I need more. And that moment, this moment when she enters the king's presence and lays it on the line, she's no longer neutral Mother Persia, like rah, Persia. She's like, actually, I'm first a Jew, not first a Persian. So that could throw the king off. But it's very much like what Jesus did, right? Esther was in the palace. She risked losing the palace, and she stepped out, identifying with the condemned people. And what does Jesus do? He leaves his palace, his heavenly palace, comes in a human body, fully God, fully man, and he identifies with us, the dead and condemned, and he brings a new covenant of life, right? And he doesn't undo sin. He doesn't disappear sin. Sin is still here. Isn't that interesting? So Jesus, when he came, he brought a new covenant that superseded the covenant of death, but there's still death. You see what I'm saying? We have eternal life, but sin is very much around us, okay? So that's just a parallel there. But Jesus is the ultimate Esther who steps out of the palace, identifies with the condemned, and provides life through a new covenant. Going to unpack that later. Okay, verse 4, and this is what Caleb read. The golden scepter is extended, so she's not dead, which is great. And she says, if it pleased the king, found favor, all this, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman. Again, in this culture, you don't do that. The laws are the laws, and she would know this, so this is a big worldview shaking new precedent. I want you to do something that's never been done, undo your law. And she says, anyway, that's what she says. Verse 7, this is great. King Ahasuerus said to Esther and to Mordecai, who's now number 2, he's right there, behold, I've given Esther the house of Haman, and they've hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. That is a great politician's answer, right? I want you to do this thing. He doesn't say yes. He doesn't say no. He's like, well, I've done these things. He's like, okay. He's like, listen, Esther, politics is about compromise. I've already done this. I've given you the house in the state of Haman. He's dead. You said he was the main threat, so I took care of the main threat. What more do you want me to do? Okay, yeah, but there's still this threat, this edict 8 months down the road. We're still going to die, okay? And so the king doesn't say, listen, I've done these things for you. Just leave me alone. Just go away. He doesn't do that. He says, he points to a secret door. He says, there's another way out here for you that doesn't really involve me. In verse 8, he says, you, plural, you and Mordecai and all the Jews, you may write as you please with regard to the Jews. Write another edict, whatever you want, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. Isn't that great? Hey, I want you to revoke the whole edict. Yeah, I can't do that. But what you can do, go ahead and take my ring, make an edict, whatever you want with the Jews. It'll be in my name with my signet ring, and no one can change it. Wink, wink. Get it? If this old edict of death is your concern, write a new one that supersedes that. Now, if this was a college class, I would pause here and have you in 10 minutes pull a piece of paper and explain, what does that mean? How is Mordecai, what kind of edict would supersede the old edict? How do you do that? And remember, these edicts are not written to the Jews. The edicts are written to the governors, the state officials. So you have to convince the governors and state officials who are already holding Haman's decree. They got it 9 weeks ago. 3,000-mile wide Persian kingdom. Everybody got Haman's edict, okay? This is the deal. Start getting ready. We got to kill all these people in months from now, but let's get some storefront property for the militias, make sure we have some weapons, and we got to figure out who's a Jew in the first place, so get on that, getting into the records. And so they're ramping up for this mass slaughter, and now Mordecai's supposed to write another edict that convinces these government officials, governors, and leaders to read his and go, oh, well, wait a minute, now it's just the reverse. How does Mordecai do that? That's coming up, okay? But if you're the governor of Turkmenistan and you get Haman's edict, you're like, fine, we'll move in that direction. 9 weeks later, you get another edict, king's ring, and it's just the opposite. The first edict was, hey, everybody can kill the Jews, just have at it. The second edict was, well, wait a minute, but now the Jews are allowed to defend themselves. So if you're the governor, you're like, well, this is a bit weird. It's like, well, so you can kill them, but they can, what's the point of this? This is typical government doublespeak, right? It makes no sense. So if you have to make a decision as the governor of Turkmenistan, and 127 other governors have to figure this out with limited communication. You can't just pick up an email like what was really going on. You have to figure that out, okay? And so the main issue in any war, the power is not really with the people who are doing the fighting, is it? The power is with the state, the government. What is the government's position on things? Because they send word to the people doing the fighting. So here, Mordecai must get the state officials to see his edict as superior to Haman's edict, right? Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So the military, the police, the fire department, they've all been gearing up to sort of aid the Persians in killing the Jews, and now the state system has to be reworked and remotivated to not do that, but in fact, back off and support the Jews. How does Mordecai do that with just an edict? That's your assignment, 10 minutes. Okay, kidding, but anyway. So that's what he's doing, all right? But how does he do that with just an edict? Verse 9. The king's scribes were summoned at that time, the third month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. All right, so this is 9 weeks after Haman's edict and 8 months before the annihilation is to happen. And here's the edict, okay? An edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews to the satraps, the governors, the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, each province in its own script, to each people in its own language, and to the Jews in their script and their language, which they're forgetting rapidly, we know from Nehemiah. Okay. He wrote, in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's ring, and he sent letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses, not the slow horses, you need the swift horses for this assignment, that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud. So they're like race horses, super fast. All right, and this whole Pony Express system that Persia had, you know, America had a Pony Express system back in the 1800s. I don't know the date, but anyway, and it lasted 18 months. Did you know the big deal Pony Express, it only lasted 18 months, but it was like zip, 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 you know, this horse to that horse, you go to Kearney, fresh guy, fresh horse, Kearney to, you know, Cheyenne, and all along. The Persian Royal Road horse system lasted for 220 years. They figured it out, all right? And so 3,000 miles, it's still not like email. I mean, it's still going to take weeks and months to get from here to there. And they would have horses stay. Anyway, it's fascinating. You get the picture. All right. It'd make a good movie, actually. All right. So this is the edict, all right? But how does Mordecai persuade the government officials that the second edict is superior to and replaces in its entirety, so you don't end up with just a bunch of fighting and civil war, okay? All right, verse 11. Here's Mordecai's edict, the contents of it. The king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives. That's new. The Jews can gather and defend their lives to destroy, kill, and annihilate, same exact language as the first edict, any armed force of any people or province that might attack them. That's pretty broad. You know what I mean? I think you might attack me. This is what this edict is. And this isn't indiscriminate. They know who their enemies are. They know who the militia are. So it's very focused, but still, you can gather and defend your lives, and you can attack those that are going to attack you, including children. Look at this. Children and women included, and to plunder the what? Why is Mordecai, who is following God in his why does he say kill women and children and plunder? What is up with that? If his edict is that all softer than the first edict, it will be dismissed. He has to have the same language because these governors are like, oh, it's kill, annihilate, destroy. Oh, well, it's the same. Women, children, plunder. It's the same. Except the main point is now the Jews have it has to be written in a way that would persuade that. But this is interesting. Okay, just quickly, more reversals. Flipping things around, as Wesley says. Haman summoned the king's scribes. Mordecai summoned the same scribes. Letters are written sealed with a ring under Haman, and in Mordecai, letters are written sealed with the same ring. Haman said to kill the Jews, even women and children, on one day. And Mordecai's edict said, you can kill any enemy of the Jews, even women and children, to be killed on one day. All right? Are the Jews going to kill women and children? No. That's not the plan. That's not at all the plan. In fact, you read the story, and on the 13th of Adar, this is chapter 9 next week, the Jews killed 500 men in Susa. The next day, 14th of the 12th month, they killed 300 more men in Susa, and then 75,000 throughout all the provinces. Men. No women and children were ever killed. All right? Are the Jews going to plunder the goods? They have no interest in plundering the goods. They're already, do you remember from the Babylon, these are the smart, trained engineers and academic people that are gainfully employed. They're doing fine, which is probably why they didn't want to leave in the first place. But anyway, there's no plundering. In fact, in chapter 9, 3 times, uno, dos, tres, eins, zwei, drei, 1, 2, 3, 3 times, they laid no hand on the plunder. Chapter 9, verse 10. They laid no hand on the plunder. Chapter 9, verse 15. They laid no hand on the plunder. Chapter 9, verse 16. 3 times we have an indication they killed men only, and 3 times we have an indication they did not take any plunder. Okay, so now, but still, why does Mordecai add this plundering thing if it's not going to happen? Again, it has to be understood as superior to the first edict, but there's another little wrinkle here with plunder. All right, who is this a battle between? Set up from the first chapter, remember Haman the Agagite and Mordecai the Benjamite. So you have this going back to 1 Samuel 15 when Saul, King Saul of Israel, was commanded to wipe out Amalek and King Agag, and he doesn't do that. He spares the king's life. He keeps all the rich, good stuff for himself, and he disobeys, which gives that line of Agag future to hassle them here, okay? So it was normal then, and it's normal now. Any army that conquers a region, they plunder it and they take their stuff, all right? That's just how it works. But they don't need the stuff. They're not planning on using the stuff. So in the minds of the Jews, why they would not do what's normal. It's normal to take their plunder. We're not going to do that because they view this battle as the final battle of the failed battle and disobedience of Saul. We're going to do it right, what he never did right. We're going to wrap this up. We're not taking. We know what happened when he took the spoil and disobeyed. We're not doing that. We want this whole Haman Agagite thing to be done with. So that's why they don't do any plunder. Okay, so it goes way back there. All right. So, and again, Mordecai's decree has to be perceived as superior, endorsed by the state, to the point that the state officials are like, okay, so the Jews have the privilege of defending themselves, but actually, I shouldn't let anyone even attack the Jews in the first place. Yeah, that's the point, okay? Verse 13. A copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all people, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. The word vengeance, I'll unpack that here in a bit. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command. And the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel, the capital there. Okay. Now, if you're a New Testament person, you're like, this vengeance word probably triggers a verse in your head, that verse in Romans about, behold, or beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And you're like, ooh. And this is one of the reasons Martin Luther, 500 years ago, Martin Luther, he did not like this book. It was too Jewish, too violent, and so anyway. But it's here and it belongs to be here. The word here, vengeance, in Hebrew implies a righting a moral wrong. It's not an emotional lashing out to get back in some kind of revenge. It's to right a moral wrong and honor. Honor comes up here pretty significantly. In fact, in Jeremiah 50, check this out. Babylon was evil, and God used other nations to destroy Babylon as part of the vengeance. This is Jeremiah 50. Raise a shout against Babylon. She has surrendered. Babylon's bulwarks and walls have fallen, been thrown down. For this is the vengeance of the Lord. Take vengeance on her and do to her as she has done to you. So this is that whole eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of thing. But sometimes God uses agents to accomplish his vengeance. It would not be wise for us to take that model and say, I am that's not what we're supposed to do here, okay? But sometimes that happens. And so the issue here is restoring honor and righting a moral wrong, not just getting back. They don't kill the women and children. They don't plunder anybody, all right? Okay. So at this point, I think there's a 50-50 chance. Mordecai sends out his edict. Okay, it kind of matches the first one. I think it's really a coin flip if the 127 governors all over are going to buy it or not. It depends. So what else can he do? He adds something. All right, we'll get to that in a second. This is a second. He adds a party. Okay? He adds a party. Verse 15, look at this. The last couple verses of the chapter, we're almost done. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes, blue and white, a great golden crown, a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The city of Susa, the whole capital is shouting and rejoicing, and in every province, in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many Persians, or many people from the country, declared themselves Jews, for the fear of Jews had fallen on them. This is fascinating, okay? Again, more reversals. You know, Haman's decree is public. Mordecai's decree is public. Couriers go out under Haman. Couriers go out under Mordecai. Susa is bewildered, but now they rejoice. Haman said Mordecai wears sackcloth and ashes. Now he's wearing royal robes. Reversal. Crying and honor. So you have death and life. And so you have just a lot of flipping stuff around. Reversals. All right? Okay. So, but now normally a celebratory parade comes A, before the big battle, or B, after the big battle. B, normally it comes after the battle. We won, let's have a party, let's have a parade. Here it comes before the big battle. That's kind of a head scratcher. Why is he doing this before the battle even? There's such state support and such confidence and such joy in undoing this decree that the Jews are just like, it's all but done. We win. We're going to go out and take care of business on that day. And if you're the enemy, you're like, ooh, you're really into this. And the state supports this. That's the point. So when the governors get this edict, and it said news had reached everywhere, they're like, they're already celebrating in the capital. This must have royal support. The state is with the Jews to such an extent they can plunder the other people. And furthermore, we better not let anybody even attack them to begin with. That is the extra thing that when they're looking at the two edicts, the 127 governors are going to be like, oh, well, the second one, we can't go against this because look, they're already celebrating, okay? So I think that's kind of what's going on. But there's more than that. I think not only does it support that the state, not only does it say that the state supports the Jews, it shows us that they're looking at the fingerprints of God. And they're like, I think this is leading up to our victory, finally. And that we don't always get that privilege, but I think they're doing that, okay? All right. In reality, the king is sort of ambivalent. He doesn't really care. Mordecai's kind of making the king look a little more interested than he really is. But you're 1,000 miles away. You don't know. The king's like, whatever, the Jews, fine. He just signs things. Let's drink. That's the king. But in reality, God is not ambivalent. God is very much present. His fingerprints are everywhere. He's behind every nook and cranny. And so the question, how am I supposed to have hope when I'm having a horrible, very bad, no good day? Because God's fingerprints are on our story yesterday, we can have faith and hope that God is with us in the middle of today's broken dreams and disappointments. And I would challenge myself and you, times of disappointment and distress, to by faith go, I don't like being here. This is not what should happen. This is a broken world. This is a broken situation. Lord, give me faith and hope that in the future, perhaps you will resolve this thing. But maybe it won't be resolved, but I can still have faith and hope that you're not really concerned about my comfort. You're concerned about your kingdom, and help me be open to your kingdom work through this disappointment today. That faith and hope is where we want to live, okay? So application, that's one of them. How can we see God's fingerprints yesterday and tie it to today's hope? And the second thing is, which covenant, which decree will you cling to? There's a covenant of death under Haman, and there's a covenant of life with Mordecai. The covenant of death is like the old covenant, the Old Testament. Jesus came, and he didn't just disappear the whole thing. He came to supersede it, to fulfill it. And the new covenant gives us life. And the neat thing about this is, for 9 months, these people in the Persian kingdom were holding 2 edicts, 2 decrees, 2 covenants. They had the covenant of death from Haman, and they had the covenant of life from Mordecai. For 9 months, people could decide which covenant to believe. Do you want to identify with the Jews, take shelter under the covenant of life that Mordecai has written, or are you going to hold fast to the covenant of death? And it is significant that it says many people of the country declared themselves to be Jews. They looked at that over those 9 months and like, I'm a Jew. Now, maybe that just means like, I don't want to die, so I'm a Jew, or maybe that they start worshiping Yahweh. We don't know. It doesn't say. But anyway, that strong support was significant. All right. So allegorically, it's kind of like we're born in Persia under a covenant of death with no hope, right? And the Lord erupts into history with a new covenant. He leaves his palace, identifies with the condemned and the dead, and he gives us life. And we share the royal prerogatives that he has because of his goodness. So I love the whole reversal thing and all that stuff. So couple questions at the end here. How can God's fingerprints in your story yesterday give you hope in today's disappointment or dilemma? Again, you just want to think that way. You just want to think, okay, you've been faithful in the past, probably going to be faithful today, probably going to be faithful in the future. You will be, absolutely. But, sometimes our emotions are all over the map, okay? And which decree are you believing? A decree of performance and death and fear? Or life based on the goodness of God? And so next week is the last chapter. Again, don't you think this should be the end? What else can there be? Well, then the real fighting starts and Persians start to die. What's the king going to do? That's next Sunday, okay? Anyway, we'll get there. Unless. All right. Lord, thank you. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for being involved in all aspects of society. We look at the world, and man, especially with yesterday's news of war and this and that, it sure can look hopeless. You've given us the ability to choose freely, to fight wars, and to be kind and gentle, to be instruments of life. And some do and some don't. And so I pray that you would help us to see before us today the covenant of life and how that would shift how we interact with other people and just love one another. So thank you for giving up the prerogatives of divinity. You're still divine, but you didn't leverage them. You didn't chase them like Haman did. And help us to continue to find joy in being called by your name and the security that brings. Amen.